Hello, 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 guys. Welcome back. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We are going to be soldiering on reading the next 3 chapters in The Sacred Art of Forgiveness by Marcia Ford. And I believe this segment, we're going to be reading chapters 13, 14, and 15. Let me double check. Yeah, okay. So chapter 13, A Healthy Choice. Making the decision to forgive someone, as it turns out, may be better for you than you realize. In fact, it may be better for you than for the person you forgive. Some have even called it a selfish choice. That's because the health and quality of life benefits of a forgiving lifestyle are so many and so dramatic that it's in your own best interest to embrace forgiveness as a regular activity. Several recent studies on forgiveness came up with an alarming list of physical disorders that result when people harbor resentment and refuse to forgive. Here are some of the health problems associated with prolonged unforgiveness: high blood pressure and cardiovascular disease, anxiety, depression, and other stress-related disorders, lowered immunity, and a more intense degree of pain in patients with chronic pain. And those are just some. Those are the physical symptoms that generally take a long time to show up in a person's health profile. If you were wronged yesterday, it's not likely that your immune system will be a whole lot weaker today. But there's one symptom of unforgiveness that shows up immediately: clenched jaws and tight facial muscles. We've probably all seen that, and hopefully not in a mirror. People who habitually refuse to forgive can look positively grim. This is hardly a scientific thing, but I suspect premature aging can be added to the list of physical results of unforgiveness. And as Norman Vincent Peale once pointed out, all that resentment you've managed to store up doesn't hurt the person you resent, but it does eat away at you night and day, hardly a picture of longevity. The anger, resentment, and grudges we carry around with us have been likened to a hot coal. Stop a moment and consider how appropriate that metaphor is. Who gets burned by the hot coal we're carrying? We do, obviously. The observation that holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else, you are the one who gets burned, is attributed to Buddha. It's an accurate observation of the damage we do to ourselves when we refuse to let go of our hostility toward others. There's another saying I heard before, and it's something like, you're drinking the poison and expecting the other person to get sick. But back to our research studies. Lifestyle issues were also found to be associated with unforgiveness, with higher divorce rates, no surprise there, and greater problems with substance abuse among people who found it impossible to forgive someone. And they also had more problems with other relationships in their lives. Well, gee, I would think so. It's important, I believe, to take these research findings as validation for our forgiving nature rather than as a blanket prescription. It's not as if you can take a resentful person, tell them to be more forgiving for the sake of their own health and well-being, and expect them to suddenly change their begrudging ways. Even though our mind must make a conscious decision to forgive someone, eventually our heart has to get involved as well. And a change of heart involves more than picking up a refill at Walgreens. It's good to know, though, that all this forgiving may be making us healthier, isn't it? It's also good to keep that thought in mind whenever we feel the slightest hesitation to forgive someone. We may find that forgiving the person comes more easily if we remember that extending forgiveness is clearly in our best interest. Reflection. Reflect on your current state of health and well-being. Unless you're actually sidelined by a physical disorder, you may be tempted to dismiss this as an unnecessary exercise, as I once would have. I'm just fine, I would have thought, and I would have gone right on to the next section. But I would have been deceiving myself. Don't follow my lead in this case. Maybe the only problem you can come up with is that you've had trouble sleeping lately. Give serious consideration to why. The reason may be something as simple as one too many mocha lattes, or as significant as a host of emotions you've been keeping bottled up for too long. The same goes for digestive disorders. Sure, you could blame it on those fast food burritos, but the culprit just may be that ongoing conflict you have with a coworker. Ask the Spirit to bring to mind every physical or emotional problem you've had lately, and then give you the wisdom to know what you need to do to deal with them. I've learned that God has no problem venturing into the mundane areas of our lives. You may receive the wisdom that what you need to do is bypass the espresso cart. And here's the practice. Charles Fillmore, co-founder of the Unity Movement, offered this advice for curing every ill. Sit for half an hour every night and mentally forgive everyone against whom you have any ill will or antipathy. Try it. Okay, I agree. 30 minutes probably worked better in Fillmore's day. Let's start with 5 minutes instead. All right. And here are our quotes to go along with this chapter. We achieve inner health only through forgiveness. The forgiveness not only of others, but also of ourselves. Joshua Loth Liebman. This is certain, that a man that studieth revenge keeps his wounds green, which otherwise would heal and do well. Francis Bacon. Which, interestingly enough, Francis Bacon, I read up a little bit on the Ascended Masters, and one of the Ascended Masters was Francis Bacon in a previous life, and that Ascended Master is Saint Germain, who was also Merlin and Christopher Columbus. I know that might sound a little bit strange to people who don't know much about the Ascended Masters or who don't believe in the Ascended Masters and there's only Jesus, but that's just what I learned from reading that book, and you can take that or not take it as something you would like to look into or think is true or not. Totally fine. I'm just sharing with you just something I read. Okay. Holding on to anger, resentment, and hurt only gives you tense muscles, a headache, and a sore jaw from clenching your teeth. Forgiveness gives you back the laughter and the lightness in your life. Joan London. To carry a grudge is like being stung to death by one bee. William H. Wharton. Forgiveness is the way to true health and happiness. Gerald G. Jampolsky. Chapter 14, Radical Forgiveness. There's just no way of getting around it. Our God is a radical God indeed. We can try with all our might to tame the spirit, turn God into a kindly old Santa Claus, reduce the Almighty's wild and woolly nature to a soft and sympathetic presence in our lives. But it's not going to change who God is, at least not for long. Just look at the Bible, starting with the Hebrew scriptures. You learn all these nice or scary little stories when you're a child, but then you put away childish things and begin to read the Bible as an adult. And there, right after the story of Daniel, he of the lion's den fame, you come smack up against the book of Hosea. You find yourself reading certain sections over again because you can't believe you read it right the first time. Did God really tell Hosea to find a whore and marry her, and to make this whore the mother of your children? That's how the Message expresses the second verse of the Bible, or of the book. I'd say that's a fairly radical command coming from the moral judge of the universe and all. And then, get this, Hosea's wife won't give up her whoring ways, but God tells Hosea to take her back anyway. Start all over. Love your wife again. Love your wife who's in bed with her latest boyfriend, your cheating wife. Chapter 3, verse 1. What on earth did Hosea do to deserve this kind of treatment from the God he served? Nothing, because this whole episode was not about Hosea at all. It was about God's unending love and forgiveness for the cheating, whoring nation of Israel, which was pursuing other gods at the time. God wanted to show Israel through Hosea's example what divine, supernatural love looks like. After letting them have it for most of the book, God promises this: I will love them lavishly. My anger is played out. I will make a fresh start with Israel. Hosea 14, verses 4 through 5. A fresh start after Israel's openly defiant and repeated infidelity. That's radical forgiveness, and it worked. Then along came Jesus, relentlessly preaching a message of forgiveness, telling an oppressed people that they should turn the other cheek and forgive 77 times 7, and insist that they make things right with their enemies before they approach God in worship. He never lets up on this message, never gives people an easy way out, never offers them a detour around the tough path of forgiveness and reconciliation. Jesus didn't suddenly drop out of the sky one day as a fully mature prophet. He grew up in Palestine and was well aware of the strife that existed there. Remember, Palestine at the time was an occupied territory governed by Romans, who considered the Jews to be little better than the unwashed masses. Injustice characterized the culture. Despite the wrongs his people experienced, Jesus told them to forgive their oppressors, their persecutors, their abusers. In fact, many Jews who expected Jesus to beat the tar out of the Romans lost faith in him as he continued to preach his radical message of forgiveness and reconciliation. Forgive the oppressors? Never. The thing is, by modeling radical forgiveness toward us, God has shown us by example that it's possible for us to practice it. Sure, he's God and all, but all we have to do is look around us to see that humans are also quite capable of practicing radical forgiveness. From murder victims' families to the victims of rape and pedophilia, people manage to rise to the occasion to forgive, despite circumstances that make us recoil in horror. Even after 30 years of hearing Corrie ten Boom's widely known story of radical forgiveness, I cannot get enough of it. Hers is about as compelling an account of human forgiveness as you're likely to find anywhere. In the book The Hiding Place, which was made into a movie in the 1970s, she tells of how her Christian family was betrayed by a neighbor for harboring Jews during the Nazi occupation of Holland. The family was separated, with Corrie and her sister Betsy sent to a concentration camp at Ravensbrück, Germany. Corrie writes of the wretched physical conditions at the camp, as well as the abuse and humiliation inflicted by the SS guards, especially those who mocked and leered at the naked women as they entered the delousing center's shower room. Deprived of sufficient food, warmth, and other necessities, Corrie's beloved sister became seriously ill and eventually died after failing to receive the medical attention she needed. Years later, following a church service in Munich at which she had just spoken on forgiveness, Corrie came face to face with the greatest challenge of her life. After hammering away at the forgiveness message at one church after another throughout Europe and the United States, and convinced that she had forgiven her oppressors, Corrie was approached by a beaming man whom she recognized as one of the repulsive shower room guards at Ravensbrück. Suddenly, the horror and grief she had endured came rushing back to her. "How grateful I am for your message, Fräulein," the former guard said to her. "To think that, as you say, he has washed away my sins." As Corrie stood there frozen, refusing to shake his outstretched hand, she was overcome by her own hypocrisy. "Jesus, I cannot forgive him," she silently prayed. "Give me your forgiveness." And Jesus did. As she describes it, a current passed from her shoulder to her arm to her hand and on to the man as she managed to shake his hand. At that moment, she was overwhelmed with love for him. And so I discovered that it is not our forgiveness any more than our goodness that the world's healing hinges, but on God's, she writes. When he tells us to love our enemies, he gives, along with the command, to love itself. I don't know of a more powerful story of radical forgiveness, but I know of many that come close. And I know of one element they all hold in common, the supernatural power to forgive that can only come from God. Radical forgiveness, a sacred act indeed. Reflection. It's a challenge to be sure, but try to put yourself in Corrie's place in the church in Munich. Place yourself in the scenario and allow yourself to feel what Corrie must have felt. Remember, you are widely known for preaching a message of forgiveness. How would you have responded to the guard, given the conflict between your reputation and what you know is right, and the hatred that has just resurfaced and threatens to erupt at any moment? Presumably, Corey mentioned Ravensbrook in her sermon, and the guard may have realized she was detained in the camp at the same time he served there, though we don't know that for sure. In any event, he is overjoyed that God has forgiven him. How significant do you think Corey's, or your forgiveness, would be to him? Practice. The word power has many connotations, some of them negative. That's just as true in the faith communities as it is in the secular arena. Religious leaders who have abused their power by turning it into a force for evil rather than good have committed a terrible injustice and have given spiritual power a bad name. Meditate on the power that God imparts to us and what our responsibility is in using it. Identify the ways that power manifests itself in your own life, such as the power to turn the other cheek, perhaps, or the power to bring hope to despairing people. Be prepared to help those outside the world of faith understand the distinction between the abuse of power by some religious institutes and leaders and the magnificence of God's power and the Spirit's willingness to share that power with us. Okay, and here are our quotes. Let the wicked abandon their way of life and the evil their way of thinking. Let them come back to God who is merciful, come back to our God who is lavish with forgiveness. Isaiah 55 verse 7 in the Message. Peace comes when there is no cloud between us and God. Peace is the consequence of forgiveness, God's removal of that which obscures. His face and so breaks union with him. The happy sequence culminating in fellowship with God is penitence, pardon, and peace. The first we offer, the second we accept, and the third we inherit. Charles H. Brent. If everybody adopted a peaceful, loving, generous, non-competitive lifestyle, we could have something better than counterculture. We could have the kingdom of God. Marvin Harris. Forgiveness is the key that unlocks the door of resentment and the handcuffs of hate. It is a power that breaks the chains of bitterness and the shackles of selfishness. Corrie ten Boom. That's the author of the book she was just talking about. Forgiveness is an act of the will, and the will can function regardless of the temperature of the heart. Corrie ten Boom again. And our last chapter. 15. Remembering how to forget. There's a wonderful story about Clara Barton, the founder of the American Red Cross, and a woman who had once seriously offended her. A friend who was familiar with the situation was aghast at the kindness that Barton displayed toward her offender. Had she taken leave of her senses? Didn't she remember what the woman had done to her? Of course she had. As Barton told her friend, I distinctly remembering forgetting that. That's a great way to interpret the adage, forgive and forget. But it's only one way, and it definitely does not apply across the board. There are far too many situations in which it would be irresponsible for us to forget the offenses. The Holocaust and 9/11 come immediately to mind. But atrocities of any kind should never be forgotten. Neither should we forget or expect anyone else to forget personal crimes and abuses that have robbed so many people of their loved ones, their sense of security, and their peace of mind. But let's back up a minute and take a look at the concept of forgetting with regard to forgiveness. First, we need to realize that we never really forget anything. It's all stored somewhere in our brains, but our access to a particular bit of information or a specific memory may be limited by a number of factors. So we may think we've forgotten all about an incident that troubled us in the past, but the memory of it is still floating around somewhere. Second, we need to realize that the kind of forgetting Clara Barton described is an intentional decision to not dwell on what was probably a fairly minor offense. She didn't mean that her brain had destroyed the memory of the offense. What she meant was that she had chosen to go on with her life and her relationship with the offender without allowing the memory of the offense to dominate either one. She simply refused to give her mind permission to replay the tape of the incident. Third, there's a forgetting that's closely akin to denial. This is the kind of forgetting that victims of habitual spousal abuse, for instance, are prone to indulge in. The abused mate forgives the abuser and then forgets or denies the very real possibility that the abuse will continue. That kind of forgetting is not only counterproductive, but also dangerous. We need to remember situations that proved detrimental to our health and well-being in the past, so we'll have the skills and sense to avoid similar situations in the future. And we should always remember to flee dangerous circumstances, no matter how forgiving we are. You can forgive all you like, but call the cops first. Finally, there's a forgetting that is nothing short of shameful and dishonoring. Do we really want to intentionally forget the Holocaust, 9/11, the bloodshed in South Africa, Sudan, Rwanda, Uganda, the Congo, and God knows how many other countries in Africa and beyond? To do so, or even worse, to live in denial that they have happened, is to bring shame on ourselves and dishonor the memory of the millions who have been slaughtered at the hands of madmen, terrorists, and guerrillas. So we should feel free to forgive and remember, as long as we don't remember by rewinding and replaying those destructive mental videotapes of every hurtful thing that was ever said or done to us. That only prolongs our agony and reinforces our negative emotions. It does no harm to our offender, nor does it do anything to heal our hurts. I like what a man named Karl Bard once said. Though no one can go back and make a brand new start, anyone can start from now and make a brand new ending. One way to do that is by remembering how to forget and when not to. Reflection. What has been your experience with intentional forgetting? Maybe it's always been easy for you to purposely dismiss minor offenses, choosing to ignore a cutting remark made by a relative or overlook a friend's failure to include you in a special event. But perhaps it hasn't been quite as easy to forgive someone who has hurt you deeply because you cannot rid your mind of the memory of the incident. How can you apply the balm of intentional forgetting to the deeper wounds in your life without diminishing their significance? Practice. Intentionally recall one of the worst offenses that was ever done to you. I say one of because I don't want you to think you have to relive a horrific experience for this exercise. Choose something that wasn't painfully traumatic. Remember the incident in detail, and then ask God to illuminate the situation for you. By shining the light of truth on the situation, you may be able to see some good in it that you were never able to see before. For most of us, very few of the negative incidents in our lives have been entirely bad. Even though you may have had a falling out with someone, you may be able to see for the first time the lasting positive impact they had on your life. Focus on the good that the light reveals and intentionally forget that which is not worth remembering. Be the change that you want to see in the world. That's a well-known one. Mahatma Gandhi. Forgetting is something that time takes care of, but forgiveness is an act of volition, and only the sufferer is qualified to make the decision. Simon Wiesenthal. To forgive heals the wound. To forget heals the scar. Anonymous. It is not forgive and forget as if nothing wrong had ever happened, but forgive and go forward, building on the mistakes of the past and the energy generated by reconciliation to create a new future. Carolyn Osiak. In forgiving, people are not being asked to forget. On the contrary, it is important to remember so that we should not let such atrocities happen again. Forgiveness does not mean condoning what has been done. It means taking what happened seriously, drawing the sting in the memory that threatens our entire existence. Desmond Tutu. All right, that completes this segment of our book. We will start on chapter 16 next time. It's titled Transformational Forgiveness. I hope you guys have been enjoying this book so far. It's got a pretty basic message, but it's something that I think is pretty universal, something that most of us struggle with as far as forgiving others, forgiving ourselves, forgetting things that we're holding on to that perhaps would serve us better if we did let go of. So yes, I hope that you are taking something from this. As I've said before, I love reading these books to you guys. I hope that you love hearing them, and I always take one or two valuable things away from everything I read. Even if every single word of what the author is saying doesn't resonate with me, that's okay. It's about learning, it's about growing, it's about opening up to new ideas and being open-minded, that just because something you believe doesn't mean everyone else will. And it's okay to hold it as your truth. And that just might not be everybody's case, but we can all come together harmoniously at the end of the day. Jesus's message was quite simple, yet somehow so hard to stick to. And that is to forgive infinitely and to love everybody infinitely. Pretty easy message, but a pretty hard task to achieve. But we can work on it and do our best together and individually. So until next time, as always, please take care of yourself. Please take care of those around you. I will see you again very soon. Please like, subscribe, and comment if you feel so inclined. I would love that. And hit the icon bell at the bottom of the screen so you can be notified when I post the next segment of whatever book it is I'm reading. Thank you so much. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.